All right, and we're live. Hey everyone, Cameron Hodge coming at you with eXp Realty here in Orlando. So, coming live to you again. Here, hope you're having a great week so far. I know it's definitely been a crazy one for me, and I hope it's been a good one for you. Just wanted to come live this week, and the main topic is kind of just talking about what's going on in the market. I mean, I've had a handful of people reach out in the last couple weeks with rates increasing, and they know they want to move to the area, whether it's between Tampa or even Orlando, obviously where we are. And there's just a lot of concern, a lot of people that are looking to rent and going through all that stuff. So I kind of just wanted to come live. I wanted to talk about it and hopefully field any questions in the process for those that might have concerns or they're looking to move here and things like that. So man, getting into it, obviously I think one of the biggest things that people are seeing and has definitely been a lot of concern for a lot of our buyers on the team here is interest rates. So yes, interest rates are definitely jumping up, and they were over 6%. And yesterday, obviously depends on what loan product you're using. As you normally see, I usually have our lender Brian here, but due to a scheduling conflict, he was unable to make it this week. But that's okay, because I can still answer as much as I can, and anything I can't, I will be able to get back to you. But yeah, so rates are definitely increasing substantially. And a lot of people are saying like, okay, well, we're going to a recession. Like, this is going to go crazy. And I'm like, especially like some of our clients are looking to make moves this year or into early next year. And they're like, I don't even know what to do now. Well, so when rates go up, obviously it's going to be more out of your bottom pocket, especially with we were still in a competitive place in terms of homes, right? So we've had clients who, they understand the process, even the market, even with rates going up, it's still a competitive market, and they're still fighting to be able to get their offers accepted on the homes they're looking for. Now, we have a lot of ways we look for off-market properties, and we do as much as we possibly can to make sure we get it done, because it's tough. It's hard, especially when you're relocating across the country, the world, with clients coming from everywhere, and it's stressful. I've done it. Many others have done it, and it's just one of those things where you just have to kind of make a plan, like I said before, and you got to stick with it. But, a lot of people are wondering, like, with rates increasing, like, what are we going to see in Orlando? Like, what's going to happen as rates continue to go up? And I can tell you in the short term, what ends up happening is once rates start to go up and those monthly payments start to increase for those looking for homes, is a couple things. One, you're going to see people who could barely afford certain price points just have to drop out. So eventually, as it starts to season, it's never an immediate thing. Like anything with real estate, it takes a little bit of time, but you will start to see, instead of getting like crazy, like 20 offers on a home, or, things like that, you will start to see smaller competition on homes. But looking at it, there's still just not many homes on the market. Some cool things, obviously. I mean, you look at last March to this March, obviously until April's done, I do not have those numbers. But looking from last March to this March, we have, decreased in the amount of homes available. Now, obviously, heading into spring is usually the more common time that you start to see people sell their homes. So inventory will pick up then. But an interesting thing is one cool thing that I've noticed that's interesting is that compared to like 2020, March 2020, we had about the same amount of homes enter the market, which is interesting because our inventory is lower than it was last March, which means what inventory means is homes that people are selling. Like there's less people selling currently this past March than there were in 2021. But what's interesting is that we had more homes enter the market comparatively than what we have had back in 2020. So, I mean, it's one of those things, like the market will eventually turn around. It's still not a bad time to buy. It's just, it always comes down to just having a plan. So like, look, I have a family member, right? They're building and, they have to lock their interest rate in, and they're like, they're sweating bullets because obviously they see that 6% come and they're like, oh man, what am I going to do? Well, obviously you do what you can to lock that rate in. One thing to notice is like rates, like you look at the last 50 years, they've always averaged between 4 or 6%. Like that's the average. So even if you lock in at a higher rate now, eventually you will be able to refinance lower. No one knows whether obviously it'll be as low as it was during COVID with like, the crazy like 2.5% interest rate or even lower. That's craziness. So, but it's definitely easy to see that it's going to keep increasing this year, which is even more important that if you are looking to move this year, that you have a plan in place to where maybe you need to move sooner, move later. Like it's just kind of got to work that out. And we're happy to help you with that and making that move. but it's stressful, and we get that. So yeah, rates, you might see competition drop off in certain areas, certain zip codes, especially for buyers that just aren't that strong. Obviously, if you're a cash buyer, or the cash competition in the market, it's still going to be there because they're not trying to get a loan for the property, so that's something that they're not really going to have to worry about. But it's also hard on the sellers, because if you're looking to sell your home and rates are going up and you're sitting on a 2.5 in your home, it might sway you from wanting to sell your home. But like I said, no one has a crystal ball, and we're just going to see how it plays out as time continues. But hey, who knows? Like, it's one of those things where a lot of people, they're looking for, like, especially if you're looking to buy a home, right? You're waiting for the crash, or they're coming in. Like, yeah, there are a lot of signs pointing to recession and all that kind of stuff. I will tell you that the Central Florida market as a whole, from coast to coast, is still competitive. It's still in a position where it's definitely low inventory, and there's still, even with rates going up, there are still people relocating and still people that need to get into a home. And we've had some clients, actually, on the flip side of that, who have decided they're like, well, I'm not going to buy anymore, I'm going to rent. And that sounds great in theory. I will tell you that rent has definitely increased substantially compared to what it was 2 years ago. So it's going up. But the one thing people need to realize is when rates go down and less people are buying a home, just like some of our clients have toyed with doing, is guess what happens to the rental market? There's more competition there, and there still hasn't been enough homes for rent compared to how many people are moving here either, especially when it comes to like your typical single family home. There's a lot of families moving to Orlando, especially, just like we did when we moved there a while ago, and it's just something that people are gonna have to face. So I always say, I still think purchasing can be a good decision. I think it can be a solid plan, especially with, you look at the appreciation of Central Florida. I think while obviously in times of recessions, like, real estate prices always go down, but the area as a whole is expanding, it's building, and in my opinion, it's getting nothing but better. And especially if you come from, like, California, or like even like Atlanta, like, or like Chicago, for example, like big metropolitan areas that have really built out the land that's available. Central Florida still has a lot of construction going on from coast to coast. And Orlando, it's expanding. It's expanding. Schools are getting better. More money's coming in here for tax dollars. And sure, some people don't like it how it's getting congested in some areas. But when it comes to owning a home and purchasing, it can be a great decision, especially compared to renting, where the competition's still high. And a lot of times you are probably going to be stuck into at least a 12-month lease. Sometimes there are situations where you can set up a different scenario, but more often than not, you're going to probably at least 7 months or more lease, I found commonly here in Orlando. And also, I think we actually got to switch topics here a little bit, but still on the home purchasing side. We've had a couple clients reach out about investing in Orlando, and they're coming from they own rental properties in like California, Chicago, places like that, and they're trying to relocate that money to Orlando. And I know some of you are probably watching this like, oh great, more investors. But it doesn't always mean that it's a bad decision. But like I said, like, when it comes to, like, a lot of people, like, obviously it's very emotional making that move. But when you see people who are looking to buy rental properties and stuff like that, like, it usually means it's still because it's a good investment play to make a decision. And buying a primary residence can be a great decision because you're building that equity, and at the same time, I mean, come on, who wants a landlord telling them how to live their life? I know I don't. So I can kind of feel like that you're probably going to want to think the same thing. But yeah, so it can still be a good decision. It's just, realize that rates are probably going to continue to go up. I mean, Feds are looking to raise rates again in June when they meet. So it's something that you're not going to run away from it. And a lot of times, like, you see when real estate markets, whether it's crashing or, like, right now we're still in a seller's market. But when we transition to a buyer's market, it's never immediate, and sometimes it can take a couple years to make a full transition. But the in-between period between markets is always painful. And people are like, if you're looking to buy a home, you're probably like, well, Cameron, like, the last couple years have been painful. I'm trying to buy a home. I get it. But the transitionary period is always weird because you see rates go up. Home prices, we might not see like, $50K over eventually. Like, eventually you'll probably start seeing homes sell at list value. Or maybe sellers start to open negotiation a little bit more compared to what people have been seeing. And it takes time. No one knows exactly when it'll start to make that flip, but it's something that you will start seeing in time. But that in-between period until it flips and we have more homes available than what people are buying, or compared to buyers and sellers, more sellers and buyers. Obviously, if you were shopping for a home, like, like 5 years ago, I mean, you could probably see like 8 homes in a weekend and have time to wait until Wednesday to decide which home you wanted to make an offer on. And even then, you'd probably be like, oh, can you give me concessions? And, can I get that? We actually had a lot of young couples reach out who were probably close to my age who've never actually jumped into real estate and purchased, like they're under 35, or maybe 25 or older, but obviously they come into here, they're like, wow, I can afford a home now, but they've never actually jumped into the market. And it's something you need to realize that, it's not, the real estate market has its ebbs and flows, seller markets, buyer markets, and it's not always crazy. Like there's still a time when I bought my first house and we were in San Diego at the time. And when we bought that first home, when I was just out of the military, we were able to ask for seller to pay all the closing costs that I was experiencing on my end. On top of that, it was a 30-day close. We were able to negotiate repairs on top of that. It's a lot of people don't realize that. And even in those markets for sellers, it can still be great. Obviously, the seller's market, you as a seller have extreme amounts of power. So you do have that ability to kind of, you have more of the upper hand. But that being said, it's one of those things where it comes and goes. But it's still a lot of opportunity here, and I still think it can be a great thing if you make the right plan and you make that decision. So, but yeah, people are starting to flow in here. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out as I ramble along here, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the area. Yeah, also we've had some thoughts before about people when it comes to new construction in this market. And, and I'm not talking about communities that are pre-built to where you can have a set time frame of when the lot build out is going to happen. I'm talking about what I did when I moved here, and that was just standalone construction. And I'm touching that a little bit. So obviously with rates going up, people start to get concerned when it comes to making new construction. Now I've done a video before regarding whether that's a good decision for you or not and some of the pitfalls that has in doing it. So feel free to look that up on the channel. But I can tell you, so one of the big fears, obviously, when it comes to new construction, let's say a good rule of thumb is it probably takes 12 months, worst case, especially if it's a custom home, to make that full evolution. And people need to understand that if you don't pay, at the time when I was going to lock my rate when we were building, they were asking at the beginning of construction for $8,000 to lock that rate, the rates at that time in before construction. Now I chose not to, taking that risk. But it's something that people need to understand, that if you're looking at new construction and rates are going up and you're kind of well, it's going to take up to 12 months for this home to be complete, should I even build? Well, it can still be a great decision, especially if you're coming from somewhere, you have the budget, you have the time to do new construction, that you might consider locking rates. Now, a lot of people want to consider, it's a lot of people are well, I'm hoping rates will decrease when I come to make that move. And it is something you can consider. But at least for the remainder of this year, it's very clear that rates are probably going to maintain this higher level, if not possibly go even higher. I mean, and we all know there's a whole bunch of chaos going on in the world, especially every time you go to the gas pump. Am I right? So you just need to understand that the one way that the Feds combat inflation, that 8.5% inflation they put out a couple weeks ago, which is probably higher than that, to be honest with you, is they raise rates. Because it's their way of combating that rising inflation, because, well, that's one way that they keep prices down instead of increasing like they have been. So, like I said, it's that transitionary period. It's tough times for a lot of people, especially if you're trying to move across the country. So it's just making the right plan. You got to realize that certain things can be done well, and you just have to make sure that you have a good plan, and you got to decide, you could rent, but I think purchasing is still a smart decision. Orlando's an awesome place. Heck, we've even had people who watched my Orlando versus Tampa video, and they're like, well, I'm moving to Tampa. And it's yeah, absolutely. I'm we have partners in that city as well that can help you make that move out here. And it's just both areas are up and coming. They're both getting better. Infrastructure is growing. And it's one of those things that I think it's just going to get better and better with time. I mean, but, come out here and take an experience for yourself. So heading into it, let's see here. What other topics did I have that I wanted to cover? So, yeah, it's weird, right? Because obviously with interest rates going up, we start to see a lot of people get concerned. And what's weird is we've seen less homes for sale, because obviously, if you're living in a house, like I said, for cheap, why would you move? That being said, it's one of those things where, I think it's ever more important to make sure you have the right timing when it comes to making that move. So in this current environment with everything's changing so fast, I swear, if you're like us, you go to the grocery store, you go to the gas pump, and I swear you're man, wasn't this just cheaper last week? Well, Yeah, most likely. So you have to make sure that you have a plan in place. Like, we have clients who are reaching out and they're like, hey, I'm looking to move, probably next summer, or even like probably right after Christmas time, making the move out here. And it's like we tell everyone, it's like with rising rates and everything like that, you got to make sure you get a plan in place with us and like your lender, and make sure like you understand the cost of moving is not cheap. I remember when we left California, like for some reason when you leave that state, it's just so expensive. But to move like a small household of things, like it was still like 8 grand for a full service mover to get out of there. I mean, there were definitely ways to probably make that a little bit cheaper, but that's just the cost for moving across the country. Obviously, if you're coming from closer states, it might not be as bad, but with the way things are getting with expenses and rising, like you just need to make sure you have a plan when it comes to making that move, because as things continue to get crazy and no one knows what's going to happen, heck, every week changes. So you have to make sure you have a plan in place so you can make a smart decision when making that move. And timelines are just ever more important. And a lot of times, unfortunately, as it is in the transitionary time, you have to make sure that you expect that you're going to pay more than what the current environment is, because it's just one of those things you have to prepare. Now, that being said, thankfully, the one reason I love Orlando still, like, so for example, like obviously I still have connections in San Diego where I came from before, because I had my business going there before. Great example of a crazy place that's just inflation, super expensive on top of rates, is competition out there is still high, even with rates going up. And, you could be in a place like that where, like, I mean, if you're like, I want to have a single family home, I have a family, I have like a moderate medium income, so I'm making like 60K a year, like, you're not going to be able to get a home probably and qualify in San Diego. Like, even in like you go like an hour north of like the center of the city, you still aren't going to be able to get a home. Like, that's how crazy expensive it is in that whole area. But one thing I love about Orlando is, I mean, as long as you're willing to have a drive, heck, if you even like work from home, you're even in a better spot, is you can start farther away from the city or find pockets to where you still can find something probably within your budget. It's never gonna be a perfect scenario, but at the same time, it's why I love this area so much, is like, if you're willing to drive, an extra distance, like you can find things more and more in your budget that isn't gonna be in a crazy dangerous area. So I think it excites me. I think a lot of times it's just perspective. You're moving here and you're like, I want to live like in Dr. Phillips, because that's like obviously a top neighborhood. Obviously, that the average price point there is substantially higher. It's one of the highest in Orlando. And you probably won't be able to afford a home there. But if your budget's like, say you're looking at like, well, like we had a client reach out and they're like, oh, I want to stay at 330, 350 when I make that budget. I'm like, well, you can always look at North Orlando. Like, there's still opportunities to find smaller homes. Like, I mean, if you have a big family, I get it. Like, you might have to go farther or find other options to be able to have a good home that's not going to be crazy expensive. But that's one of the blessings you have here is, I mean, like you look at like San Diego or Chicago or like even New York, right? Like, if you're like, let's say like you look at drive time, you're like, oh, I'm 30 minutes away from this, I'm 45 minutes away from that. It's not because of distance. It's probably because of traffic, and it just locks up and gets crazy. So, and one thing that I love about Orlando, like, sure, it's definitely getting crowded. I mean, especially during snowbird season, all like the retirees come in and the vacationers, and they come in around Disney World and all that stuff. But, if you find the right area, you're tucked away and you kind of, honestly, like, you don't have to really deal with that. But the cool thing is like, you find the right pocket, like you can just kind of avoid everything, find a home still in your budget. Sure, you might have to drive like 40 minutes to Disney World just because you're going around or going some weird way to get there. But at the same time, it can put you in a great spot to still find a home, still get established. Because honestly, I think that's the biggest thing when you move here is like, if you have kids, make sure obviously schools are important and all stuff like that. But making sure that you find an area that's safe and good, and then just getting established in the area. That's what's most important. Because once you're established and you learn the area, and who knows, like after you find a good area and get established, like who knows, you might like a couple years down the road be like, you know what? I think I want to try somewhere else. Like let's say you were like in Winter Garden, like you were living, let's say in like North Orlando, any one of those cities like Lake Mary, and you're like, hey, I love this area, it's nice, but I feel like I'm just a little tucked away more than I want to. Well, if your budget gets more like established, or you get more set up and you're like, hey, I love Winter Garden, like that is an awesome area, I think it's great schools, great people, and I'm like, I want to relocate there, then you can do that. But when you're making a big move coming from somewhere else, it's so important that you have, just get established. I mean, that was one of the things that we almost didn't do coming out here. We just kind of we were about to wing it, to be honest, when we first made the move out here, and that would not have been a good decision. It probably would have burned in flames if I had made that decision when we moved out here. But so Well, I'm going live here. Does anyone have any questions? I know we have a couple people watching the live right now. Any questions or any concerns? Like, feel free to shoot them. This is your time. So I'm live right now. I come alive every Wednesday, and this is my time to just answer any questions, concerns, or just thoughts about Orlando in general and like what you'd want to do coming to move here. So that being said, yeah. So it's a great area, and I think one of the things, especially like when you talk about like other lockdowns and other areas and stuff like that, like you're coming to an area that it's staying open, it's staying free, and it's still awesome people. And like even look at like 10 years ago, it's completely changed than what I remember. I feel like Orlando used to be just like a man. I couldn't believe people lived here permanently because it just felt like a vacation area. And now coming back here after that time period and living here, like it's just insane how much has changed. And I'm even surprised. I used to think like schools were, I mean, honest, it's the South. I used to think schools were terrible here, but now like a whole bunch of schools are A+ rated, they're high ratings, safe neighborhoods. It's definitely not what it used to be. Um, oh, we got a question here, and so it's like, how's the traffic? So traffic really depends on what area you're living in. So traffic, I mean, so if you're going along the 4, right? And I'm going to pull up a map here while I'm setting this up here, but you go along the 4, right? And obviously if you're living in certain areas, especially around Disney World, it's going to get crazy. Like there's no way you can't contest it. Like if you're like definitely near those big areas and the crowded in the city, like yeah, traffic can be bad during work time. It's a city. You're not living in the country. It's not like you're in the middle of nowhere, Midwest. You're like the middle of Oklahoma. So there's gonna be traffic from time to time. All right, let's see. I'll pull it up here. There we go. So yeah, so like obviously along the 4, as people continue to build out, it's going to get to a point where traffic's going to get heavier and heavier, just because especially as people move here, traffic builds up. So the 4 can get really congested, especially around Lake Buena Vista, and if you're in like the center of Winter Garden, like depending which way you're trying to go during those peak work hours, it's going to get crazy. Like you can't really avoid it. So it's one of those things you just kind of have to deal with, and then that's why you really decide, right? Like even like Lake Mary, like if you're going a certain direction at a certain time, like yeah, I can still get crowded. Like you're still in a suburb area, it's still busy, but it really comes down to where you're working and then just planning what direction you want to go to kind of avoid traffic. And you have to make a trip out here. Like this, like I recommend everyone to do. You have to make a discovery trip. Come out here, drive around, go during peak traffic hours if you're able to, if you're here at the right time, and just see everything. But a lot of times if you're like a Popka and like Zellwood and you get out here, like you can kind of avoid traffic in a lot of ways and not kind of be stuck in the craziness that is like Disney World and stuff like that, because it just gets insane there, especially during like winter season where everyone's vacationing here and everyone wants to go to Disney World. But the cool thing is if you live here permanently, it's like, yeah, it's hot during the summer, but if you're able to get a day off or whatever and you go on like a Wednesday, like it's gonna be a lot less people than you would imagine. You're gonna have to deal with probably rain and maybe some thunderstorms, which might put a damper on your day. But there's times that we go to like amenities out here during the summer, and it's like we have their own place to ourselves. So we have another question. It's like, are the cost of tolls a lot? So if you're not used to living on the East Coast, so I came from New York. I didn't even know like freeways are free, because the 90 going across New York, like we always had to pay to get on it, so we would just go around it. So toll roads are a big thing here in Orlando to a point. Like, yeah, you can avoid them more often than not. You don't have to take toll roads. A lot of times, depending where you're coming from, like it can be a huge time saver that you're not having to deal with the tolls. But you can get a card, it's like a SunPass. My wife set all that up. I'll be honest with you, she definitely runs all that. But you get the SunPass, you get on, you get off, and it's really not too much. It's kind of like I'd rather budget it in for the time I'm saving in a lot of cases. But you don't have to take the toll roads. But I think it threw off a lot of people that when we made the move out here, is because they're like, what's a toll road? You come from like Southern California, like they don't really exist. I mean, they're in LA, but if you're coming from San Diego, I mean, they're trying to put some in now, I heard. But yeah, it's East Coast. There's toll roads, and if you're coming from like a lot of places that there already are toll roads, and it's probably not going to be news to you. But yeah, it's also important to make sure where you're working if you do have to travel to work, because you have to make sure that if you are having to take a toll road, you just factor that in when you make that decision to move. But all right, so we have a couple people watching. Again, like this, I do these lives every Wednesday for you. This is the time where I just answer any questions, concerns, or thoughts about anything Orlando related or just really real estate related, anything. Like I'm happy to answer your questions, help you decide if this is the right make. Even if you're deciding like, hey, I don't even know if I want to move to Orlando. I just randomly search if I'm making the move to Orlando. Happy to answer any questions you have because it's a lot of us. I think they come from like a really far away places, New York, California. Heck, even like South Carolina. We've had clients come from everywhere. I mean, I've even heard people, reach out to us come from the UK. So, it's a hard move. We've all done it. Our team we've all relocated here from other places at some point in time. So it's what we love to do. Made a lot of mistakes when making that move out here, and try and help you to make sure you don't make that decision. Make the bad choice when making the move out here. But all right. Well, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I am getting to wrap up now as we head closer to the 30-minute mark. But if you're watching this and you're considering like, should I make the move to Orlando? Like I always say to everyone, like you have to take a trip out here. And the unfortunate thing is a lot of us, if we have kids or stuff like that, we're coming out here during the summer. And the first thing everyone says is, oh my God, it's crazy humid. It rains every day, let alone if you come when there's a hurricane coming in. And people just get really bummed out. But when you come here during the winter and like the humidity drops off compared to what it is in the summer, like it rains, but not gonna be as much during like, April to November. And it can be like you start to understand why people come here during the winter, let alone come here to live, because it becomes an awesome place during those winter seasons where it's like 75, 80, 85 every day. Even during the winter. Summer can get a little hot, but the winter's an awesome time to be. Oh, I got one more question. How are the drivers? There we go. How are the drivers there since there are so many different people out there? So I grew up in the country. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So my perspective is a little skewed. I think it's a city, and I think the more people you have on the road, the crazier it's going to be. I don't know if this is like a really big thing, but like I've been a lot of places in the military when I was living around, and when we came out here, one of the first things I noticed is there were a lot of blown tires on the highway, just like everywhere. And it's not like a lot like in the middle of the roadway, but like on the sides of the road. There's so many blown out tires, and maybe it's because of the weather and the humidity. It just hits different on the rubber. But man, like I just saw so many blown tires when I came here. It's just one of those weird things. It's just so funny when you move places and you start to notice stuff more. Or if if you grew up somewhere, you don't always notice. But when you relocate from somewhere else and you come out here, you start to realize like, why are there so many tires just blown out on the side of the road? I don't know. But the drivers, yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, if you're driving a lot, like it's probably going to get to you. It's a city. There's a lot of people. There's still bad drivers everywhere you go. Personally, coming from San Diego, I don't know. That was way different. When you're coming from like a big metropolitan area like Chicago, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, like New York City, way different. Like I think it's way better than being in those places. But yeah, it's still a city. You're not avoiding the traffic. But that's why I love this area, is you can live farther out if you want to and kind of avoid people as much as possible. Hey, it's not for everyone. Some of us just like to have our alone time. Am I right? So, but yeah. All right, guys. So it's heading here. I'm going to start wrapping it up. Like I said, we get calls all the time, text, email when it comes to making that move to Orlando, and us on the team, we absolutely love it. So if you have any concerns, if you're like, hey, like I'm traveling out here, and you're like, where are some good areas I should go visit, give us a call, reach out. Happy to kind of point you in the right path to make that best decision that you for your family, regardless of what you decide to do when you move here. But we're happy to give you that insight, because it's one of those things where I think I made a lot of decisions, and some of the stuff we did choose, even where we do live, like I think I would have maybe chose different areas, because after you live here for a while, you start to realize like, wow, like I like where I'm living, but you start to realize some other areas that kind of stand out to you more depending on what your style is and what you want to look for. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And like I said, I go live every Wednesday. Normally I have my lender Brian on with me because he lives in Tampa. I live in Orlando, and I think we get that good dynamic of just a whole area here and just giving outside opinions, but also like I don't get biased being the one living in Orlando. So I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.